following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Man. I'm in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and down by the lagoon, as Archie Bunker would say. I have the privilege on this podcast of talking to one of many of the interesting people I've had over the course of the years. I'm blessed. I'm a dull guy myself, but I get to talk to the most interesting people on the planet. Today is no exception. He's been a Facebook friend of mine for a long time, and as I was saying to him off the air, our main connect is that we are both Willie Mays giant lovers. I'm a giant sympathizer these days since the Mets came along and the Giants left me in 1957 when I was 10 years old. But I still have a great interest. Willie Mays never waned for me. Mr. Gott, I'm blanking on your first, Rick Gott, I'm blanking on you. I blanked on your first name. But I am so happy to have you on the Comfortably Zoned Network. You're from Texas, and you don't know that I have Texas background.
Oh, I've looked you up. You were in the military here, weren't you?
I was. Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco, but before that, I was in Texas. I went to basic training at Lackland in San Antonio. I took tech school, which was a computer class to operate supply computers in the Air Force, and I took that at Amarillo. Do you have connects with any of those two cities?
Yes, San Antonio, for years I followed the Missions, the minor league baseball team. For years I believe they were the Dodgers. And
Dodger organization, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. And more recently, I believe the Padres and Nelson Wolff Stadium. It's a really neat stadium to watch minor league baseball in.
Whoa. I'll look for that next time I'm in Texas. Amarillo you probably don't know from. I think Amarillo was, in every way, the worst place I ever lived in. It was the weather, it was the middle of the winter, it was the vastness of it all, the emptiness of the vapid mines around me. I don't know what it was. But I do have good memories of San Antonio. And my son's mother went to school in Houston. She went to Rice. And,
she's a good lady.
Yes. Hey, with that, rest in peace, Diane Satin. You're thought of on these airwaves often. Tell me about your first baseball experience when you were a kid, baseball experience as a fan.
Okay. I grew up basically in the Astrodome. My father, I was born a Willie Mays fan because of my father. I got to go to several hundred Astros games, and we sat in the cheap seats out in the outfield that overlooked the outfield, and I used to talk to Willie Mays all the time. It was probably the greatest thrill to see Willie Mays at the bottom of the fence. I mean, it was just, there's nothing that can explain it.
Now, can you put some years on this so I can imagine Willie in various states of his career? What years did you see him?
I saw Willie in the early 70s in the Astrodome. and he still had pop and flash. And I'll never forget. Ralph, do you remember when he would run and his helmet or his cap would come off?
That was his trademark, especially in the early days, running around the bases. And yes, did you see that in actuality?
Yes, I did. I saw that in the Dome, and I got to tell you that the day that they traded him, and I understood that he started in New York. I'm a lover of the Giants. And I know where he started and when they came out to California. But the day they traded him back to the Mets, I cried like a baby. It was one of the saddest days of my life. I even told my dad that they just should not have center fielders. I mean, don't trade Willie. Willie was the man.
Well, he had lost a step. They were making way for the Maddoxes and of the world. And Horace just couldn't pay him. He just absolutely was floundering with the Giants, and he came to the Mets and he gave them the '73 National League Championship. He didn't give it to them, but there was just enough left in him that he was able to contribute and probably they had three center fielders. They had Don Scheck, they had Schneck, they had Willie. I think Gosker played there for a while. It wasn't Willie's best times, but there are players that played with him in 1973 that have told me that he was the best athlete on the team at age 43 or whatever. He had spurts. He had games where the old Willie came back. And in 71, when you saw him, that was the year of the Fox with the Giants. Charlie Fox was the manager. Chris Spire and Tito Fuentes were breaking in, and Willie was the on-field manager. He led on-field. He called pitches. He adjusted the outfield. He was absolutely unbelievable in a lot of ways that have nothing to do with his actual playing. He was his baseball IQ might as well have been 100 or 200 rather. He was very special.
Do you remember when I believe it was he and Bonds ran into each other at Candlestick?
I do, going up that fence, that chain link fence to make a catch. Willie outjumped him, and he was no spring chicken at that time. And he made a fantastic catch with them both going up. And if you want to talk Willie, you got to talk Bonds. But not just Barry. Barry was his godson, but Bobby had an incredible amount of talent, and the thing that hurt him the most was that he was expected to be the next Willie Mays. And without that moniker, I wonder if it would have affected his off-field. That's a lot of pressure. He was known to have his demons off the field, and his real career was hampered by his demons. And I'm not saying he was every bit as good as Willie or his son, but he was right there. Right there. You mentioned a trade that made you cry. Yeah. The trade that made me cry was Bobby Bonds for Mercer with the Yankees.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. I understood it in the same way you understood the trade for Willie, but from the heart, it sucked.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Where do you stand on, because I read a lot on Mays. I think he's the greatest guy to ever put on a jockey strap myself. Where do you stand on ranking Mays and Ruth? And there's a lot of historic significance in that. Where do you put Mays above Ruth?
I don't. I think Ruth would have made the Hall of Fame as a pitcher, and he revolutionized the game in the sense that he had Gretzky, what I call Gretzky-like stats. They were so much superior to the rest of the league. I mean, he hit more home runs in 1 year than the entire league at, or this, that, and the other thing. Not that I'm taking anything away from Willie. If you wanted to ask me, in my time, who the greatest player was, unequivocally, Willie Mays. But all time, I just hit on his talent as a pitcher. My God, he won 20 games as a youngster, and left-hander, and he had a career ahead of him in that respect. He was something else. You got to give him that.
He was great. I mean, let me throw something out at you and see what you think. You got a left-handed hitting Ruth. You got a short porch in Yankee Stadium. You got Mays played in the two biggest parks I've ever heard of, Polo Grounds and the Stick. The Stick made bigger by the wind. And Mays was a all-around athlete, in my opinion. He was by a tool. He lost 266 games to the military. You got things like that going on. I respect Babe Ruth. He's in the top two. There's no doubt in my mind. But I just have a love and a passion for Mays. I just think he was such a five-tool player. What do you think about that?
Well, you're absolutely right. And remember how I worded it. I'm not taking anything away from Willie with my opinion on this. Okay. Because we could talk about that for a long time. The house that Ruth built, they didn't mean it just because he packed Yankee Stadium. He was responsible for the dimensions of Yankee Stadium, and you're bringing that to my attention. Everyone out there's attention is very valuable. Thank you. It may put the number of home runs that he hit into perspective a little bit. What adjustments he would have made in a different park. I like to go by what was. What are the numbers? Let's put it that way. And you can't take anything away from him from that standpoint. And then you could talk about Henry Aaron. Henry Aaron played a little DH at the end of his career. So, what do you say about it all? There's something that Peter Golenbach taught me, that you cannot compare players from era to era.
That's good. That's a good point.
And so when I tend to think of who to compare Willie to, it would be Mickey Mantle. And for that comparison, I invite you to the writings of Leonard Coppett, who wrote a very famous essay. He was a thinker ahead of his time. He wasn't an analytic thinker in terms of baseball analytics, but he did use statistics and was able to write his story around statistics with not having it be dull. In other words, using the statistics as a modifier to what he was saying, as opposed to writing the story around the statistics.
Okay.
I hope I'm explaining that right, but look for the writings of Leonard Coppett, one of the all-time baseball geniuses. I don't throw that around lightly.
Okay.
I would say when you talk about baseball geniuses, Branch Rickey, Bill Veeck, who wrote the book on analytics. His name escapes me.
Me too. I know you're talking about.
Yeah, great thinkers of the game. Coppett was a great thinker of the game. He's right up there with any of them. So, tell me your favorite of all time Willie Mays memory.
My favorite of all time Willie Mays memory. Wow. Because I'm from Texas and the only place I could see him was the Astrodome. We would go to batting practice early. You'd go into the Astrodome, you'd enter on ground level, and that air condition would hit you, and it felt like it's like 40 degrees. You come in, and the Astrodome was sunk into the ground. And back in the day, before they moved the fences out to make it more homer friendly, the fence was right on the playing surface. And so my dad and I would go to batting practice, and invariably Mays and usually McCovey during batting practice would be standing out there talking. And I actually got to talk to them one time and dropped my glove down, and both of them signed my glove. And that was the biggest thrill. As a kid, I thought I had what I was going to say planned, and I just went numb and couldn't speak. So I guess actually talking to them was probably the coolest thing. They talked back to me and asked me my name and how old I was and that kind of thing. So I actually got to talk to Mays and McCovey sort of in the left center field cheap seats at the Astrodome. That was pretty cool.
That was pretty cool. Did you have fun on this podcast? Let me ask you.
I had a blast. And
I think I promised you that it would be fun. You were reluctant initially to come on, and I just wanted to make sure that you did have fun, because if it ain't fun, it shouldn't be getting done, and that's my whole idea of all of this. Would you come back sometime?
I will, and I appreciate you very much for having me on, and it has been a thrill. And one last thing, did you ever see Mays play shortstop?
No, I never did. I think he came in as a Met for a little bit at shortstop, but I personally never saw him. Where did you see him, if you did?
Yes, sir. It's in a historical baseball book, History of Baseball I have, and it actually shows him playing shortstop early on in his career. And there's a couple of pictures of him actually playing first base, which is bizarre to me because every picture you see of a power hitter, they're big dudes. Mays was not that big a man. He was not, 5'11" maybe?
He was built like a brick shithouse, but he wasn't very tall.
Oh, no, but he was cut, but you always think of him as a center fielder, but he did play other positions, which is just amazing to me.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a little Willie Mays and Don Mueller story. Don Mueller played right field for the New York Giants, and he was known as Mandrake the Magician. He didn't have much pop, but he was a hell of a singles hitter. Mm-hmm. And he took Willie down to the last day for the batting title, and Willie won the batting title by 1 point. And he said, and Willie was the center fielder between Mueller and Monty Irvin. Mm-hmm. Very little range on either of those two parts. So he was playing the whole outfield. So they had an interview after the last game of the season, and Mays and Mueller are sitting together. And Mueller, a very humble guy, a nice guy. I called him on the phone once as a kid. and chatted with him, and he was incredibly nice. But he was a very humble guy, and he says, well, if I have to lose the batting title to anyone, I'm glad I lost it to the best center fielder in baseball. And he goes, right, and Mays goes, right fielder too. In other words, Mays was, you can't say humble. Mays had a bunch of pride. He knew he was an entertainer, and
yes, sir.
he loved to do that. There was a little bit of the dog in Willie, and he let you know it. If you listen to YouTube interviews and what have you, and him chatting with other players, and he was, like I say, he didn't need to be humble. How about that one? He was the one guy that lived up to everything that he thought he was.
Yes, sir.
All right. Come back soon, my friend. And
I enjoy it very much.
All right. And I want to thank everybody for listening. And every now and again, I remind that if you like this podcast, this particular one, or anyone, do me a favor. Do me a big solid. Box up some lightly used or even new children's books and take them down. Don't do it now. There's a pandemic. But take them down when you can to the Head Start program in whatever community you live in. It will help give kids who really need reading material, school readiness, math, a little English. They can develop heroes as we did from reading. It would be great if you do that, and I'd feel good about the podcast. I'd feel good about everything. Keep your heads down. These are tough times. Stay indoors. If you go out, wear a mask, and please stay healthy. Thank you, everybody. Adios.
Adios. Thank you.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.